Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be discussing Dynasty Startup Draft value picks. They're going to help you dominate your league.
Hike!
This is a very popular time where you're going to be seeing a lot of Dynasty leagues starting to be formed. There's going to be startup drafts happening left and right. And so in this episode, we're going to be talking about some players that we've got our eye on, a consensus list that we think are good value. So, Joe, why don't you start us off with the first guy? Who do we got?
Yeah, first guy we're going to go with is quarterback Baker Mayfield of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And, based on the Draft Sharks Dynasty rankings here with the Superflex PPR League, his current ADP sitting at the 501 in the fifth round. Still age 30. Baker's still on the way up with the Buccaneers offense. Has been performing pretty well the last couple of years. I think adding Emeka Egbuka to the offense only helps him and really only helps add to the value and just on top of what Baker's able to accomplish. So I think being able to, especially for a super flex league, being able to snag a guy like Baker Mayfield in the fifth round is a pretty good value.
Yeah, I think when you look at it, he's 30 years old, so he's a little bit older. He's probably got at least a few more years left on him. But when you think about Baker Mayfield, he's been a guy who's been very consistent over these past 2 years. We're looking at this specifically from a super flex perspective. So if you can get a guy like Baker Mayfield in the fifth round, most leagues he was a top 5 QB last year. So you have him coming in. You don't have to necessarily do quarterback back to back in round 1 and round 2. You could get a guy like Baker in round 5. I think you and I think this is quite a value. I think that you would, if you got Baker in the fifth, I think you'd be very happy with him being the second guy. I probably wouldn't recommend him being like your one guy, but hey, I mean, if you wanted, depending on how the draft fell, if you want to get certain guys in the first 4 rounds, certain receivers or running backs you felt like made a lot of sense to you, I don't think you can't. I mean, it'd be risky because I usually like to have good quarterbacks in a super flex league, but I think you could definitely roll with Baker Mayfield here.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter, Baker Mayfield has been a good quarterback. And, you just looking at some of the other ADPs, you had a guy like Kyler Murray, going at the 404. So, I mean, I'd much rather wait that extra, round and snag Baker Mayfield.
Right, and as we know, Baker's got 2 more years on his existing contract, and then in 2027, he'll be a free agent. So more than likely at this point, I'm kind of surprised if he leaves Tampa Bay. He's becoming more enmeshed in that organization, and like you said, I think you'd want him there with Godwin, with Emeka Egbuka now, with Jalen McMillan, Mike Evans. I mean, it's a great spot for him.
Yeah, and at the moment, the Buccaneers don't really have a contingency plan for Baker Mayfield. So unless they start that, next year in the draft or something, it more than likely looks like, as long as they want Baker to be back, I'm sure he'd go, be fine going back to Tampa.
It's crazy. I mean, to pay homage to when we first started our podcast a few years ago when Pete was with us, and he'd say let Baker cook or something like that, or
I think let him bake, right?
Let him bake. And we said, yeah, he's baking burnt stuff here.
Yeah.
It's time to get rid of him. But he's really, we're gonna be eating our words here, Joe, because he's really, reclaimed his career, and I thought we thought maybe even Kyle Trask could win out on that job, but he blew that starting job away, and what he's been able to do over the past 2 years and how he's led the Bucs to the playoffs has been impressive.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show you that the situations just absolutely matter. I mean, because now like everyone thought it was crazy that the Browns took Baker Mayfield, with the number 1 pick, and then they just put him in a terrible situation. He had the Browns had the one good year where they made that playoff run, smashed the Pittsburgh Steelers there in the playoffs too. But outside of that, I mean, it was just a terrible start for with Baker Mayfield in Cleveland, and
even
really,
worse in Carolina too, though. It was just
it was way worse in Carolina. You're not wrong about that, but it really just took that. I mean, that one game that he got with Sean McVay and the Rams, and we were like, "Holy crap, who is this guy?"
Saved his career, honestly.
100% it did.
All right, so the next guy we're going to be talking about here is wide receiver Jaylen Waddle. If you look at his ADP, he's looking to go around in the 7th round, and we like that. I think that's a great value. I mean, you think about a guy like Tyreek Hill, who was his counterpart in Miami. He's not getting any younger, Joe. Rumors that he's going to get retired, and honestly, he's becoming quite the problem child for Miami. Recently, just came out and someone asked him who was the top 5 quarterbacks, and purposely didn't include Tua, but he's talked about Tua in the past. His antics are just getting to be too much. So when you think about a guy like Jaylen Waddle, he signed a contract extension with the Dolphins. They don't really have anybody behind him. I mean, they drafted Malik Washington 2 years ago, but they haven't really addressed the position. And so as a result, so long as Mike McDaniel stays there, I mean, it seems like they wouldn't move off him. But even if they don't, Waddle seems to be the number one guy. And, obviously he hasn't been able to stay healthy. That's the big thing with him. But for the 7th round, we think it could be a great value and worth the risk.
Yeah, I'd agree. In the 7th round, I do see the value in, Waddle's still pretty young player. And if he could ever just play a full season and not get injured, I really think his talent would show out. He's got the talent, he's got the speed to play. And the Dolphins offense is really good for him. But combination of, Tua can't stay healthy. He can't keep himself healthy. He's been disappointing for fantasy, but if ever those things could align correctly, I mean, he'd be performing and easily crack, like, I think, top 15 receiver.
Yeah, I mean, going back to his contract here, he still has 4 years left on the contract. And, really the Dolphins aren't realistically getting out from underneath him until probably that 4th year of the contract, possibly the 3rd, but they'd be eating some dead cap on that. They would be much better off waiting until 2028. But at that point, he'll be 30 years old. And for a guy who's primarily a speed receiver, that might be a career after that for Waddle. But you never know. I mean, he might get traded. We don't know what the future holds. But more than likely, he's a Dolphin. And he could honestly garner a lot of targets because, like we said, I don't think Tyreek Hill, how much longer is he really in Miami for? And then, it ends up that Waddle's got to be the guy then.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not looking like, Tyreek Hill will be on the Dolphins much longer. So at that point, it will be the Jaylen Waddle show, because they really, outside of, adding Malik Washington last year, I know they got Nick Westbrook-Akine over in free agency, but outside of that, they didn't really draft a wide receiver this year. So the wide receiver room is still pretty bare, and Waddle's, clearing away better than the other receivers they have on the roster.
All right, Joe. So who is our next player that we think is a value pick in startup drafts?
Yeah, we're going to go with running back James Cook of the Buffalo Bills, and he's currently getting taken in the 5th round at the 503 spot. And, look, this guy, he's coming off of a really good year. He's actually had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. Obviously, last year being the anomaly of having, 18 combined touchdowns, compared to the previous year only having 2. So we will see some touchdown regression there, but he's still going to be the number 1 running back in Buffalo for the Buffalo Bills. And we just seen, since Brady took over as the offensive coordinator, it's really a run-first offense. They really let the offense run through, James Cook, obviously Josh Allen in the run game as well. But, Josh Allen he passes less. They rely on the run. And I know James Cook has got 1 year left on the contract here. It'll be interesting, whether or not the Bills decide to bring him back or not. But I still think he's a young enough running back, talented enough with his burst and speed, that even if he's not with the Bills, he'll go on another team, and other teams will figure out how to use this guy.
Yeah, I think if you look at the players, let's say look at the running backs before him, right? You've got Kyren Williams at in the 4th round, late 4th round. I think I'd rather have Cook at this point. Kyren Williams has 1 year left on his contract as well. And I think it's probably even more bleak that, if he's not on LA, then, he's just a volume stuffer right now. So if he goes somewhere else, who knows what's going to happen to him, right? You got Jonathan Taylor in the mid 4th round. That seems to make sense. Bucky Irving a little bit higher, which I think is kind of surprising. And then you got Breece Hall in the early 4th, which, there's been a lot of chatter about Brees Hall, and they're talking about the possibility of him getting traded, and they're talking about having a committee. Like, things seem kind of off, when it comes to Brees Hall. So none of these guys are a sure thing. And the last guy I want to highlight here is Devon Achane in the third round. People really like him, and I've been wrong about him in the past. But it's interesting what they're doing in that running back room. We'll see, does Jalen Wright ever show up? And then they also go ahead and draft Ollie Gordon late. Who knows if he'll even make the roster? He's a late round pick, but he's a very talented player out of Oklahoma State. Had he went in the draft that year where he really took off, would he have been drafted possibly even higher than when he was? Because he had such a disappointing year and all the off the field issues as well. So I think Cook. And I think if I had to make a guess today, I think Cook probably stays at the Bills. I mean, I think his $20 million demand is just nuts. I don't think anyone's going to pay that. I think they probably allow him to test the market and say, hey, we want you to come back. You let us know what you hear. And I think that at the end of the day, unless somebody blows him away with a contract offer, I think he'll probably end up staying in Buffalo, which would be good for him because he's really done well. Although, who knows? I mean, let's say Joe Brady ends up getting a head coaching job and then he gets signed, by Joe Brady's new team. He could be really good too. I mean, you got to remember, he really turned it on when Joe Brady took over. Before that, he was kind of like hit or miss.
Yeah, but he was hit or miss because he didn't get the opportunities until Joe Brady took over.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Absolutely,
the volume increased. So, yeah, it would be interesting, if Joe Brady did get a different job and say, James Cook stays with the Bills. But I think the formula is there for the Bills, and it is better run first. It keeps Josh Allen out of those, wild interceptions, those big plays where, the turnovers would just hurt him. It just keeps him within the framework of the offense, and his numbers are better. And obviously, James Cook has been a huge beneficiary of that as well.
So next guy we're going to be talking about here is a guy who right now you could really take advantage of his price, and that's DK Metcalf. Right now going in the 7th round. A guy who now on the Pittsburgh Steelers you could say is a complete wasteland because who's the quarterback? I think you and I both expect that Aaron Rodgers will be the quarterback. I mean, he did just become a member of a Pittsburgh country club. So why is he doing that, right? Reading between the lines here. But anyways, in all seriousness, I think we both think that Rodgers will be there. And even if he's not, Pittsburgh has a ton of draft picks next year with them, now trading away George Pickens and getting that 3rd-round pick in return. I think they'll be able to address the quarterback position in next year's draft. And by the looks of it, it's going to be a stronger quarterback class, or so they say, right? The draft pundits out there that say it's going to be a good class. We'll find out. The proof will be in the pudding when we get later on in the year for 2026. But either way, Steelers will address it. And even if DK isn't as good right away, he's 27 years old. So it's not like you can't say, okay, we'll take 1 year that he's not so good, but he's still going to be 28 the next year, and he's still going to be 28, 29, 30. You probably got him for another 3 years, possibly with that contract extension that he signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with you. I mean, I do fully expect, Aaron Rodgers to be the quarterback, and that would only be for a year. But I think that's where, if he does really well with Aaron Rodgers, his value is obviously going to increase. So in the 7th round here, I think is really good value. And, the Steelers, acquired those extra picks. And if the draft class, like you said, is really a lot better next year, they got the drafts to improve that as well. So I at least like compared to some of the other receivers that were going near DK, they had some more uncertainty. I know we had mentioned possibly talking about a guy like George Pickens, but he's just there 1 year in Dallas. Who knows if Dallas decides to bring him back or where he goes, and he's not going to be for everybody, with the different locker room issues. So I think, DK, knowing the stability with the Pittsburgh Steelers, yes, there's instability at quarterback, but I think the Steelers will figure it out.
One thing I didn't notice, which is interesting about the contract, is he did sign a 4-year extension. He's going to be with the Steelers no matter what for the next 2 years. But then for the remaining 3 years, so 2027 through 2029, Steelers could get out of it when he's 30 years old. So technically he's on
Mm.
the books for 5 years and he's a free agent, when he's 33 years old. Be interesting to see how that all develops. I would think they'll probably keep him, but I guess they've kind of given themselves an out in case, his skill set doesn't continue on as he ages.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, especially for the Steelers, they're a conservative organization, anyways. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me that they would kind of put it in a fail safe in case things don't work out.
All right, so last guy we're going to be talking about here, Joe, is going to be running back Derrick Henry. He's going in the 6th round of startup drafts, and we just talked about him recently. I had brought him up in one of our episodes. It just so happens that was prior to the conversation about him getting an extension. He only had 1 year left, and then what do you know? We got the news, earlier in the day before ours was scheduled. The episode was scheduled to get posted. That he signed a 2-year, $30 million contract extension with the Ravens with $25 million guaranteed. And kudos to him. I mean, at 31 years old, we've never seen a running back like that get a contract this late in his career. I mean, he is certainly an anomaly. I would fully imagine a Hall of Famer at that, and what he's been able to do. But this may surprise you, because when you look at it and you're like, guys, this is a dynasty startup draft. What are you doing drafting a guy, Derrick Henry, with his age of 31 years old? Well, not so fast. How long is Dynasty League going to really last for? Let's be honest. When are you going to start seeing orphans pop up? We like the idea of Dynasty, and Dynasty is a lot of fun. But, honestly, what is the average length of a Dynasty League? And I know you feel similar to me, Joe. I'm going to try to win right away, because I don't know what's going to happen in 5, 6, 7, 8 years. It's fun to kind of look at the young guys and draft. Like, I get it. I enjoy that just as much as anybody else. Thankfully, in our league, heck, I mean, we've had our Dynasty Salary Cap League, that is, been going for since 2019. So I mean, we're going on our 6th year, which is really exciting, and it's been a lot of fun. We've seen a lot of adventure with that, but that's not for everyone that it's going to happen that way. So to me, you go for it, and for a guy like Henry in the 6th round, Joe, I mean, look at the guys around him. I mean, you're not going to get the same production this year for those who are around him.
No, definitely not. I mean, I think that's why we really like Derrick Henry be the value. And, we've talked about this before. I agree with you. Like, I'd come into the mindset if I was in a startup draft here, like, I'm looking to compete and win now. So I'd have no problem taking some older players. And, I've always said I'm willing to trade picks for, known commodities and everything else. And that's simply to just keep trying to keep that championship window open. Sure, I'd rather have the veterans and ditch the picks. Yeah, the rookie draft is fun and all, but I mean, it also, you have to hit on those picks. I mean, just because you have a bunch of picks doesn't mean they're going to work out for you. Especially in our league, it can be tricky, especially with our full defense that we have, all the different guys that we have in the mix in our drafts. But you mentioned some of the other guys around them. I mean, even Christian McCaffrey's 29. Dealt with the calf injury last year, something that could crop up. He's at the 509, ADP wise, compared to Derrick Henry, who's at the 608, almost a full round ahead of him at that point.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I mean, it's a different strategy, right? And it's different strokes for different folks. So if you go for it, if you want to go for the younger route, trade for picks and do what you want, I think that's great. Hopefully you're in a league where the league members and you feel confident that it's going to last. But the reason why people like startup drafts so much is they want to hit the reset button, because after a few years, we know that the parity goes out the window. And all of a sudden, you're going to have such imbalance where you're going to have teams that are absolutely stacked and then teams that are just bottom dwellers. And it's going to take a while for them to get out from underneath that. And so a lot of times people want to fold and start fresh. So that's why I wouldn't be scared off by the older age, when it comes to the Dynasty Startup Draft.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't either, because I'd want to, try to draft the most stacked team I can, no matter the age. I mean, sure, you can focus on some younger guys later in the draft, but at least at the top, I'm taking, trying to get all the top players I can, regardless of their age.
So that does it for this episode. We went through our value picks for Dynasty Startup Drafts that we hope will help you dominate your league. If If you haven't done so already, check out our most recent episode. We talked about Derrick Henry in this one too, like I alluded to. We talked about some dynasty trade targets for teams who are contending and looking to win now. You're not going to want to miss that. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.